Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Mike. I am the American Analyst, and today we are going to be discussing the Bernie Sanders town hall. I watched the whole thing, so you don't have to. If you like what I do, please be sure to subscribe to me here on YouTube and follow me on Twitter and Minds. Now, let's get into it. Okay, so we're going to jump right into it tonight. But first, so I guess we're not going to jump right into it today. Firstly, there's been some news with the Donald. He pardoned a bunch of people today. This is from the Tribune. And one of them was Rod Blagojevich. People from Illinois will certainly know who that is. He's a former governor. I am very concerned about this. I do support the president. I do. But right now, this concerns me greatly. More than any of the impeachment stuff that happened. It concerns me greatly. I'm sure that more reasoning as to why he did it will come out in the next couple of days. And I will be following that. Because as of right now, it's not clear. And if it turns out that he was just released because he was his friend, he was Rod Blagojevich's friend, that is deeply troubling to me. So, I'm not one of these people that supports anybody carte blanche, as the French would say, no matter what. I will not ever do that, and I will give criticism to the president when it is due. And it is particularly due in this case. I hope some reason comes out that it is justifiable. I'm not sure that that's going to happen. So, on to the more fun stuff. Please excuse me if I'm looking off to the right here. I have some notes. So, I went through the whole debate. Firstly, you got to give... Just like you got to give criticism where it's due, you have to give credit where it's due. I thought Anderson Cooper did a good job moderating. Most of the time, it was the people in the audience who were asking questions, but Anderson did push back on pushback's a fine word. Push back on a couple of points, which I thought was really good. So, strange day here at the American Analyst. We are criticizing the president, and we are praising CNN. So, hey, them's the breaks. Getting into it, first question was from a union worker, and he asked about healthcare. This is a big issue for Bernie, particularly because recently one of the largest unions in America, I think it was the Culinary Union, had come out against him because of his healthcare plan. Bernie's Medicare for All would abolish private insurance, which includes the many sweetheart deals that current unions have. So they are understandably upset about that. And Bernie dodged the question. He 100% didn't ask the question. The question was something like, what would you say to unions who are worried about losing their health care? And he just prattled on about health care as a human right and X, Y, and Z. So he dodged the question, and throughout the rest of the night, he was saying how much he supports unions. It's like, well, you support them, but you're going to take their health care. It's like, okay, I guess the counter argument with that, and Bernie said this, he's like, well, we pay a lot more, and it's going to be better. Union workers pay for health care too. Specifically, he brought up that one of the counter bargaining chips that management often uses in negotiating with unions is, okay, we'll give you a $10K raise, but we're also going to take 1% from your health care, which I have heard, actually. So, but, I mean, at the end of the day, it doesn't change the fact that he is going to be taking these sweetheart deals, and many unions are, in my opinion, justifiably concerned about that. And that's a nice segue. We always try to link things back here with history. brings me to trade unions and the Soviet Union. One of the first things that the Soviets did, or I should say the Bolsheviks did, when they took over was to limit the power of trade unions. Well, because, I mean, you don't need trade unions when you're in the workers' paradise, obviously. What do you need a union for? You're already in the workers' paradise. So I'm just going to read you one brief segment, which is, because of the course that was determined as the Bolsheviks defeated other models of socialism, Soviet trade unions ended up, in fact, actually governmental organizations whose chief aim was not to represent workers, but to further the goals of management, government, and the CPSU, and primarily promoted production interests. So, to put this in a context, in socialist countries, trade unions have virtually no power. It's actually another segment here. Trade unions in China are also subordinate to the party and to state planning. So, I mean, obviously, makes perfect sense if you ask me. I don't think that I don't think unions are going to take this without asking very many questions. I think this is going to be this isn't something that's going to go away for Bernie, is my point to that. So the next question was something along the lines of, okay, they talked about gentrification and the Bernie Bros online harassment. So gentrification, I understand why it's an issue. I don't understand why it's a problem. And what I mean by that is the issue is that people are concerned that if you tear down low-income housing and you build a skyscraper in its place, luxury housing, that it will push people out of that particular neighborhood, which is true. That will certainly happen. However, firstly, I mean, so what's the alternative would be the first thing. So you just leave the poor housing there. Is that the alternative? You build no more new buildings are to be built ever. It's obviously impractical. And furthermore, you have a high rise. If you're willing to invest tens of millions of dollars in a neighborhood, that's going to stir growth throughout the entire community. I mean, you're going to have shops popping up, tens of thousands of workers employed for years. So I can only see this as a net benefit, and by a fairly wide margin. And not only that, if you look at pictures from Cabrini Green from the early 2000s, late 90s, versus that area today, the transformation is incredible. So Cabrini Green was probably the most infamous Chicago public housing project, probably ever. And it was torn down, I think in 2011, might have been 2010. And the area now, 10 years later, is fantastic. It's so nice. It's unbelievably nice. So obviously it is an improvement. There is a balancing act, but I don't see. This seems more of a solution than a problem to me. Like, if you want to fix bad neighborhoods, building nice housing might be a good start. So that was which is why I also don't like the term gentrification, because it carries a negative connotation. But, it is what it is. And then the Bernie Bros thing. So the Bernie Bros, this has a lot to do with internet culture. For those of you who don't know, there's a section of Bernie Sanders supporters who could only be described as radical ideologues. Communists would also probably be a fair term. And I'm actually not saying that facetiously. There are radical Bolsheviks that are part of Bernie Sanders supporters. And there's been a lot of pushback from people who are, normal, sane human beings who are saying, look, that's, Trump's got crazy people too who support him. Yes, obviously that's true. It's 100% true. There was that guy who shot up a Republican baseball game, I think 2 years ago now. Bernie's not responsible for that, obviously. It's just a crazy guy who went on a shooting spree. So I'm not particularly concerned about that. But he will not condemn his followers. That's the biggest thing with me. If there were any racist elements within the Trump campaign, you would not only have Trump himself, but also Trump supporters coming out and condemning that immediately. Immediately say, yeah, they're not with us. This is not someone who represents us. But with the Bernie campaign, it's the opposite. It's, well, I mean, I think we should condemn violence from all parties. And that's literally what he said. Literally what he said in this debate tonight. And some of you may be thinking, didn't Trump say that a while back after whatever it was, Charlotte or whatever that town was in South Carolina? He said, there's good people on both sides. Well, I'm here to tell you that's fake news. I try not to use that term, but it just is. It's just not true. The next sentence out of his mouth, literally the next sentence, was, I'm not talking about the white supremacists, white nationalists. They should be condemned totally. That's the next sentence out of his mouth. I just rewatched a podcast with Joe Rogan, and I think it was Jordan Peterson and Brett Weinstein. And they were talking about this, and they were totally swallowed up by the media's perception of this thing, 100%. And it was very fresh at the time. So you can definitely cut them some slack because it was a brand new story. But literally, at one point they say, he should have said, not these people. There's other people there with legitimate concerns, but not these people. And that's exactly what he did. But they also made a point about the timing. That was not the time to make that point. It was definitely not. It was 100% not. So that was 100% legitimate. Okay, so the Bernie Bros. They talk about online harassment, and they're saying, no one should be harassed online, X, Y, and Z. I don't care. That's not the point. That's not the point why people bring that up. The point is that you have some of Bernie's supporters who are genuine radicals, who genuinely dislike the United States. Dislike is probably an understatement. Their main goal is the overthrow of the current system of government. So I don't care about online harassment. Tell me what you're going to do about the people who just genuinely, radically dislike this country. Tell me about those people. But he avoided the question. So, it is what it is. And that's a good segue. Bernie's definitely a populist. There's a lot of these things. I understand why people like him. I get it. I get why people like him, because he's not an establishment candidate. That's one of the biggest reasons that I like President Trump, because he's not with this establishment, these politicians who they don't hate the working class, but they are, what would you say, derisive? They don't care about them. They think they're better than everybody. And Bernie certainly is among that. Is among the opposition to that. So I get why people support him. But you have to understand, you have to excise, for the Bernie supporters out there, you have to excise this radical element. You have to get rid of these people. Get them out of whatever your movement is trying to do, get them out. Well, I don't think that's not going to happen. So then they talked about climate change, and the question that was asked was, how do you make countries like India and China follow your climate agenda? And he dodged the question. He didn't say. Oh no, he did. He did answer it. He said something along the lines of, we have to talk to them. That was the sum of it. To be fair, he said something along the lines of like, we're going to use diplomacy to do that, and it's just not practical in any way. And the next thing that he said was, we want to remove all fossil fuels by 2030 for power plants for power generation. So he's not totally 100% like no more gas-powered cars. He's not saying that, but he is basically saying that 90% of the ways that we currently generate energy have to be changed in 10 years. And again, with our historical theme here, the only way it took humanity all of its existence up to 1800 to get to 1 billion people. 200 years later, we are now at 7 billion. And that is 100% because the Industrial Revolution was able to turn heat into motion using steam-powered engines at first, and then combustion engines secondly. That's the only reason that we can currently support 7 billion people. And there are alternatives. I understand that, but it is quite literally impossible to do that. It is impossible. Maybe you could do it if you starved a couple of billion people. Maybe you could do it then. And again, Anderson did a good job. He asked him about that. He's like, well, I can't remember what he said, but he pushed back on him a little bit. He's like, what? He asked about the technology. He said, what about people are saying that the technology is not there? And Bernie just said, oh, we're going to invest in it. We're going to invest in R&D, is what he said. Like, okay, you're going to come up with a brand new energy that nobody's ever thought of in 10 years. Great. Fusion-powered engines. Fusion-powered cars in 10 years. Appreciate that. And that's the thing. I don't understand why climate activists hate nuclear power so much. I really don't. It is currently the most efficient form of generating electrical power that we know of today. By a wide margin. Something like 1,000 times more efficient than using oil or natural gas. And I don't know why they don't like it. I think it's just because of the negative connotation of nuclear, nuclear toxic masculinity. That has to be the only reason. I cannot see another genuine reason. So, last point. I know we're going a little bit long. They talked about Israel and Bernie's stance on it. Bernie has some. I'm gonna be fair to Bernie. Bernie has some people that are pretty anti-Israel on his team, but I do not believe he is like that. I think he views Israel as being unfair in the region, but not necessarily totally vile. He did say it was allowed to exist, which I guess is the least you could do. But there are people on his team that do not believe that, allegedly. Okay, fair enough. He was fair. He was fair on that point. I thought it was fine. I disagree with him, but I think he has some logical points there. And the one thing I'll say also is in reference to American hubris, I would say. And to that point, something along the lines of people have been fighting in the Middle East literally since agriculture began. Agriculture began in that region. The first farms sprang up in that region, and they have been fighting nonstop ever since. And so to think that we have the ability to come up with a plan that no one has yet thought of, to me strikes me as incredibly arrogant, bordering on self-delusion. We can mitigate things, definitely. We can certainly mitigate things. We can try to help in whatever ways we can. There is something we can do. But and Donald Trump's guilty of this too, 100%. Every single politician says, I have the plan to fix this problem. It's not true. They don't. Because I don't. And I can tell you that nobody has figured it out in 10,000 years at least. So you know, there you go, is what it is. I'm gonna pack it up there. I don't think I have anything else particularly important. Yeah, I've said the most. I've hit the most important pieces. Again, I think the main thing is I get why people like Bernie. I do get him, but get these radicals out of your party, Bernie. Get them out. My name is Mike. I am the American Analyst. If you like what I do, please be sure to subscribe to me here on YouTube and follow me on Twitter and Minds. I come out with new videos every single day. Have a good one. Thank you all for listening. This is Mike, the American Analyst. Follow me on Twitter, Minds, and subscribe to me on YouTube. And be sure to hit that bell notification. I'll be coming out with new videos every single day for your viewing enjoyment. Have a good one.